Back in 2010, Nissan really started the modern mainstream EV movement. Sure, other manufacturers had created electric vehicles in the past, and of course there had been some really sexy electric vehicles from various car companies before, but none really did what the Nissan Leaf did for America back in 2010. Up to that point, EVs had been very limited quantity items. Manufacturers would make them, you could either lease them or you could buy them, but they weren't really making that many of them. And of course, a lot of those other manufacturers stopped making them when they ran into problems or when they ran into budget issues. But Nissan has stuck with the Leaf for over 7 years. Today we're out here in Napa taking a look at the all-new second generation Nissan Leaf, which gives us added power, added range, and of course more refinement than the Leaf that started this whole movement. As you approach the car, the first thing you'll notice is how much more like the rest of the Nissan lineup the new Leaf looks. We have the same sort of U-shaped chrome grille right here under the Nissan logo that we find in Nissan's crossover lineup, and we have the distinctive chevron theme inside the headlamp modules. Because this is the top-end SL trim, we do have LED projector headlamps. Interestingly enough, the basics of the Leaf from back in 2010 are still here with this version, although about 90% of the vehicle or more has been completely redesigned for the 2018 model year. In terms of overall length, the Leaf comes in at 176.4 inches long, which is about 1.5 inches longer than the 2017 model. That means that this is still a compact vehicle in America, which is larger than something like a Volkswagen e-Golf or a Kia Soul EV. This is about 8 inches longer than the Volkswagen Golf. More importantly, this is about 12 inches longer than a Chevy Bolt, which you could see as direct competition to the Leaf. The size difference between this and the Chevy is most noticeable in the wheelbase. We actually have about 4 inches more distance between the front wheels and the rear wheels, which gives us more interior room. From the side profile, the difference between this and the previous generation is instantly obvious because this looks a little bit more mainstream and really a little bit more like Nissan's crossover lineups, specifically the Murano perhaps right back here, than the original Leaf. The rear end has of course been restyled for 2018. We find a much more prominent Nissan logo, definitely different tail lamp modules. These now mirror what's going on in the headlamps up front, and of course amber turn signals over there on the other side. As you'd expect with any EV, there are a lot of clues that this is an electric vehicle. We have a zero emissions logo, we have blue trim around here, and then of course we have functional aero treatments under the bumper to help smooth out the airflow and reduce drag. Under the hood, we get an all-new electric drivetrain. We have an AC electric motor producing 147 horsepower and 236 pound-feet of torque. That's a significant improvement over the first generation Leaf. That motor sends its power to the front wheels via a single-speed reduction gear set. Sometimes people call that a one-speed automatic transmission. Power is provided by an all-new 40 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack, and that's how this gets 150 miles range instead of about 100 miles range in the last generation Leaf. If that's not enough range for you, Nissan tells us that there will be a Leaf with over 200 miles of range coming for the 2019 model year. We expect that to get about a 60 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack, so it should have range very similar to the Chevy Bolt. Charging happens via an onboard 6.6 kilowatt charger, and there's also an optional DC fast charge CHAdeMO connector that'll give you 80% charge in about 40 minutes. Regular charging will take between 35 hours and 7.5 hours, depending on the kind of power you have access to. As before, charging happens up front. We have a standard J1772 charging connector and an optional CHAdeMO connector. This is standard in the mid-level and top-end trims. EV range is a key differentiator for the 2018 Leaf because at this moment in the United States, we have a whole collection of electric vehicles that give you about 100 miles of range. If you get something like the new Hyundai Ioniq or the new Volkswagen e-Golf, then you'll get about 125 miles of range. But this gives us 150, pushing it a little bit closer to something like the Chevy Bolt. But in terms of overall price, starting at $29,990, this is an awful lot closer in overall price to the 100-mile range EVs in America rather than the Chevy Bolt, which is about $6,000 to $7,000 more expensive than this. Nissan has not said how much the extended range Leaf will cost in 2019, but expect it to come in right around $36,000 or $37,000, which is just about where the Chevy Bolt comes in. Essentially, every new EV in America comes with an emergency charging cable or level 1 charging cable that lets you charge at 120 volts. But for 2018, Nissan is giving this an interesting twist, and top-end models will actually come standard with a level 1/level 2 charging cord. So if you take a closer look on this, it has sort of a modern 4-pin dryer-style plug right there. And if you want to plug this into a regular 120-volt outlet, there is this little adapter right here, so you can charge your Leaf and take this with you using whatever kind of power you can find available. One thing worth noting is that the Leaf still has a passive cooled battery pack just like the original generation of the Leaf. You might be wondering why the Leaf does not get an active battery pack. That's actually pretty easy to explain. Manufacturers have to make tough choices about what features to include or not include in their cars. Instead of spending the money on the active cooled battery pack in this vehicle, we have a heat pump system that we don't see in the Chevy Bolt, and we have an overall lower sticker price. The heat pump system makes this vehicle use less energy to heat the cabin in the winter than we find in the Chevy Bolt, but they do sacrifice that active battery heating and cooling functionality. The Leaf offers one of the most comfortable front seats available in a mainstream EV. These are significantly more comfortable than what we find in the Chevy Bolt. It mainly has to do with the amount of seat padding, the overall shape of the seat, and the fact that we also have an available power driver seat with two-way adjustable lumbar support. Some EVs out there are very focused on weight savings, and I'm glad to say that Nissan was willing to give up a little bit of that weight savings by giving us more padding and more comfortable seat designs. The overall seating position in the Leaf is fairly upright and a little bit higher off the ground than you might expect. In some ways, this feels a little bit more like a subcompact crossover in terms of the overall ride height. Now, we don't have a tilt telescopic steering column in this cabin. This just tilts, it does not telescope to extend out the reach for shorter or taller drivers. It's also worth noting that although I do have a generous amount of headroom here, several inches of clearance left, the rearview mirror is positioned a little bit lower than I would like, and that does obstruct the view a little bit if you're trying to drive the car hard out on your favorite winding mountain road. Obviously, this would be a little bit less of a problem for people that are under my height. I'm about 6 feet tall, and a little bit more of a problem if you're over my height. Although the driver has a power seat, like most vehicles in this category, the passenger seat remains a manual design. Thanks to the overall size and shape of the Leaf, rear legroom is fairly generous. I have about 2 inches of legroom left sitting right here behind myself, and these seats are again more thickly padded than we find in many of the competition. This reminds me a little bit of the Toyota Prius in a way. Although legroom is quite generous, you will find more headroom in some of the competition. And if I sit upright in this back seat, my head does touch a ceiling. I have to crane it to one side in order to fit back here. The Leaf is a 5-passenger vehicle. We have a fairly large hump right here in the middle for an electric car, and that's because some of the battery electronics and other things are sitting right there in the middle. But I still have enough room to sit back here comfortably, and actually I get a little bit more headroom in the middle position. If I were to scoot all the way over to the other side of the car, the front seat is all the way back in its tracks, I still have just a little bit of legroom left. Moving to the cargo area, we still find a generous amount of cargo room. It's just about the same as we had last year. Definitely enough room to keep 22-inch roller bags in this upright position right back here, and still close the cargo area and have the tonneau cover in place. Since we're driving the top-end model, we have a Bose subwoofer neatly tucked in right there at the end of the cargo area. And you won't find anything under the cargo area load floor because we don't have a spare tire in the Leaf. We've moved to a lighter interior color, so it's a little bit easier to see what's going on inside. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, and two-way adjustable headrests. Because we're in the SL trim, we have leather upholstery with a perforated section right there in the middle. We also have some suede accents on the side and blue stitching. Although these seats are perforated, they are just heated, not ventilated, and 2018 sees the removal of the rear heated seat option. If we move on over to the front door panels, pretty much everything you see here in the lighter color is a soft touch material, and the black sections are hard touch plastics. We have a hard touch upper, hard touch lower section right there around the bottle holder, and then soft touch materials for the armrest and that door panel. The two-tone theme continues over to the dashboard, where we find this sort of geometric pattern trim instead of faux wood trim inside this cabin. All the plastics on the dashboard are hard touch plastics, as we see in many other EVs in the United States. This helps save money, and of course it helps reduce weight as well. Because we're driving the top-end model with the Bose audio system, we find tweeters positioned right there in the A-pillars. Moving over to the center of the dashboard, we find 2 large air vents, and then the 7-inch infotainment and navigation system. A standard 7-inch display comes in all Leaf models, but if you want the factory navigation and Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, you do have to step up 1 notch to the SV trim. Aside from the addition of Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, this is basically the same infotainment and navigation system we've seen in several other Nissans before. Below that, we have the standard single-zone automatic climate control, the vehicle's power button, single USB input, heated seat controls, and a 12-volt power port. There's also a slot where you can store smartphones and, of course, keys. Nissan decided to use basically the same joystick-style shifter as before. Park is this button right up top. If you want drive, we pull over to the left and then pull towards the driver. You do that same thing again to switch from drive to the B mode. If you want neutral, we click to the left and hold, and reverse is click to the left and push away from the driver. Again, we press P to park the car. Enabling and disabling the single pedal drive mode is done with this switch right here, the E pedal mode. We pull towards the driver like that, and the Eco mode button is a simple press button to the left of that. Between the front seats, we find 2 large cup holders, an electric parking brake, a soft padded armrest, and a fairly small storage cubby. All Leaf models now come standard with a partial LCD instrument cluster. The speedometer over here on the right is the only physical element that you see. On the left, the cluster tells us things like the status of the transmission, whether it's in park or in drive. We also get turn-by-turn navigation directions, fuel economy screens, the status of the vehicle's active safety systems, if so equipped. You can also customize the display and certain vehicle settings. There are also a few EV-specific gauges like this power and regeneration gauge that gives us our range right there in the middle. There's a little battery icon to tell you how long it would take to charge the battery based on the power input shown right there in the middle. There's also a battery temperature readout, and quite unique to the Leaf, we also have a battery health display that tells you basically how degraded your battery is over time. So as the car and the battery age, say for the next 10 years or so, you would see this chart slowly dropping down here towards 0. As with the current generation Leaf, Nissan does offer a battery capacity warranty. Check with Nissan for more details about that. Moving out from there, we find basically the same flat bottom steering wheel that we see in a number of Nissan's latest crossovers. It has aggressive sport grips up top and a partially split bottom spoke. On the right side of the steering wheel, we find the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control system and the Pro Pilot Assist system. That's this little blue button right here. You adjust the distance with this button, and then you'll find a voice command button and dedicated phone button below that. On the other side of the wheel, we find the infotainment controls, volume up, down, track forward, backward, and then this joystick-style button with the back button that controls the multifunction display in the instrument cluster. The first thing you'll notice out on the road is how much more power we get out of this lithium-ion battery pack, and that allowed Nissan to put that bigger electric motor under the hood. Thanks to the battery pack and the larger electric motor, we ran from 0 to 60 in 7.7 to 7.8 seconds. There was a decent amount of front tire slip because over 230 foot-pounds of torque is quite a lot for a small vehicle like this. And of course, it's being delivered to just those front wheels. That also means that under acceleration in corners, we do get just a little bit of torque steer, although it's fairly well managed for an electric vehicle. In terms of overall acceleration, that places us towards the top end of the mainstream EV segment. Something like the BMW i3 or the Chevy Bolt will of course be a little bit faster 0 to 60, but this is going to be faster than your average mainstream EV in America, notably faster even than something like a Toyota Prius. I think the Prius comparison is particularly apt for this EV, because the Leaf was to the EV market what the Prius was to the hybrid market. It wasn't necessarily the first hybrid in the world, but it was the one that made the biggest impact. And of course, the first generation Leaf, like several generations of the Prius, was very, very distinctive in terms of overall styling. Now that has been toned down a little bit in this generation of the Leaf. This seems to feel a little bit more like the average Nissan vehicle, just like it looks more like the average Nissan vehicle. And that seems to reflect a growing trend in the EV category, where shoppers seem to be looking for more normal vehicles that happen to be electric cars. In our brief braking test, we stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 130 feet. That is a little on the long side for the compact category. However, it's right in there with many mainstream EVs. Remember that the Leaf is heavier than something like a base Nissan Sentra, and therefore stopping distances are likely going to be longer in many situations. Nissan has really done an excellent job smoothing out the transitions between regenerative braking and friction braking, and they're absolutely unnoticeable in this generation. Nissan did an excellent job at managing those transitions in the first generation Leaf, but things are even smoother in this generation. One of the tricks that Nissan uses in order to smooth out these transitions is that when we first apply the brakes, it actually uses the friction brakes for just a brief moment. That helps prevent the delay that we see in vehicles like the Toyota Prius or the Camry hybrid, where if you start braking very gently, it's using the regenerative brakes, but if you transition to moderate or really aggressive braking, there's a moment where nothing's going on, and we don't see that in the Leaf. This system effectively pre-charges the braking system so that way it's always ready for you when that braking transition happens. In addition to the improvement in braking smoothness, Nissan has also given us the e-pedal functionality, which is very similar to what we see in the BMW i3, taken to the next level. This allows you to drive the vehicle without ever using the brake pedal. You will notice a change in the way the accelerator pedal feels, and you can change modes on the fly. So as we're driving right here, I could enable or disable the e-pedal. The exception to that, of course, is that if we're at a complete stop like we were right there, you can't simply switch off the e-pedal system without putting your foot on the brake pedal. That's quite a logical limitation. The system senses your deceleration rate as well as the incline that you're on, whether you're going uphill or downhill, and then manages the braking appropriately. Instead of merely limiting things to the regen braking like we see in some EVs out there, this will use a blend of the regen brakes and friction brakes to take you to that complete stop and then of course hold you there. The e-pedal obviously takes a little bit of getting used to, but I do like this kind of pedal concept in stop and go traffic, because the transition between going forward and stopping is much faster than lifting your foot off the accelerator pedal and then putting it on the brake pedal. So if you're in that stop and go traffic situation, that can make things just a little bit more relaxing. While we're talking about braking, I should also mention that Nissan's new braking system blends friction braking and regen braking when you're in the B mode and the battery capacity is at or near full capacity. In most electric vehicles out there, when the battery is at or near full capacity, even when you have it in the aggressive braking mode, it's not going to do much regen braking for you. And that's because the battery simply can't accept that much power back into the pack. The overall suspension design in the 2018 Leaf is essentially the same as the 2017 Leaf. Weight has gone up by a little bit over 200 pounds in this model versus the last generation, thanks to the larger battery pack. That means that overall handling ability is relatively similar to the last model. I'm going to give this a B when it comes to overall modern mainstream EVs. This doesn't feel quite as engaging as BMW's brand new i3 or the Chevy Bolt. Of course, keep in mind that those two vehicles are smaller than this, and the i3 of course is rear-wheel drive. If you were to compare the Leaf to mainstream hybrid vehicles, this really isn't that far off the current generation Toyota Prius, although the Hyundai Ioniq does handle a little bit better thanks to its independent rear suspension. The rear end of the Leaf can feel just a little bit upset if you start pushing this car hard on broken pavement in the corners, but most people aren't going to be doing that. Although the Leaf is still a compact vehicle, this has a better ride to it than your average compact car in America because of the added curb weight. The battery pack in this vehicle makes this about the same weight as your average mid-size family sedan, although it's in a slightly more compact package. And that means that in general terms, this rides a little bit more like the average compact sedan, so perhaps a little bit more like a Nissan Altima than something like a Chevy Spark. Compared to Chevy's Bolt or BMW's i3, the longer wheelbase in the Leaf is definitely noticeable. It helps smooth out things because the suspension has time to settle when the front tires go over something and then the rear tires go over something. Cabin noise has also been improved in this generation of the Leaf. We haven't had a chance to test this on our official test course. However, our preliminary tests came in at 71 decibels, which is very respectable for a compact car. When it comes to fuel economy, I'm going to have to give this a question mark. EPA ratings are not available for this model yet, and we have been averaging about 3 miles per kilowatt hour. However, we have been driving on hilly terrain, 0 to 60 testing the vehicle, braking testing the vehicle, etc., and that's of course going to drive down your overall economy score. I suspect that for most drivers out there, this is going to run between 3.6 and 3.8 miles per kilowatt hour, depending on how aggressively you're driving the car. As is pretty typical with electric vehicles, the faster you're going out on the highway, the lower your overall economy will be. As with most Nissans in America, there are 3 different trim levels to choose from: S, SV, and SL. S, of course, is the base trim that gets you that under $30,000 price point, but also gets you a great deal more standard equipment than we had before. All models of Leaf in the US get their standard autonomous braking system, the e-pedal, one-pedal driving concept that we discussed earlier. We also get Nissan's connected services and, of course, the app that allows you to lock, unlock the vehicle, start charging, find the charging status, etc. That's enabled by that 7-inch standard LCD in the instrument cluster. We also get auto climate control, the 6.6 kilowatt charger, and XM radio. If you want to get the heat pump, you can get that even on the base trim of the Leaf. And that's definitely an option that I would get, especially if you live in a colder climate, because it's really going to save you on the battery. If you want the DC fast charge port in the nose, that is also available in the S trim. The mid-level SV trim starts at $32,490. That gives you things like alloy wheels, fog lamps up front, the Android Auto and CarPlay integration that we see inside the cabin. The DC fast charge port becomes standard, and of course you get radar adaptive cruise control. If you get the top-end SL trim, which is what we have been driving today out here in Napa, California, that'll give you the leather interior. We also get the LED headlamps that we saw on this particular model. We get power driver seats with 2-way adjustable lumbar support, the Bose audio system, and of course we get more active safety systems standard in the SL model. An interesting touch with the new Leaf is that you can add those active safety technologies on basically every trim of the Leaf. It's pretty easy to see why the Nissan Leaf is the best-selling electric car in the US and the best-selling electric car in the world. For about $30,000 before federal or state tax incentives, you can get a vehicle that will give you 150 miles of EV range. That's more than enough to meet the average American's daily commute and give you some buffer for weekend use. Obviously, we don't have the same kind of range that we see in the Chevy Bolt, but that will be coming up next year for the 2019 Leaf. If you're shopping for one of the best electric values in the United States, definitely put the Leaf on your shopping list. And also, if you're looking for an electric car, but you think that 90 to 120 mile range just doesn't give you enough buffer to make you feel safe and secure, definitely give the 2018 Nissan Leaf a try. You'll see this model available in dealer showrooms right around January of 2018. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been the 2018 Nissan Leaf. Be sure and stay tuned for our full and complete review when we can get our hands on one for a full week. As always, you can find us over at facebook.com/AlexandAutos, and if you want to support this channel, head over to patreon.com and find us over there as well. I'll see you next week.